The Secret Life of J.P. Morgan, Power, Wealth, and a Hidden Heartache. J.P. Morgan, the billionaire who saved America, but died lonely. Untold story of J.P. Morgan, the billionaire who bought America. People always have two reasons for doing something, a good reason and the real reason. This quote is attributed to John Pierpont Morgan, also known as J.P. Morgan. But what was his real reason, and why did he hide it from everyone? Look at his face. You've probably seen it before, even if you didn't realize it. But I'll tell you where later. J.P. Morgan built the world's first and largest financial empire. He saved the U.S. from bankruptcy several times, earned an unthinkable fortune, billions so large it's impossible to calculate. He controlled the most profitable industries of his time: steel, weapons, railroads, and electricity. He even came up with the Federal Reserve System, which prints dollars for the entire world. You could say Morgan bought the US and helped solidify its global power. They said his influence was greater than any president's, and he had sway over world politics. He had everything at his fingertips, yet he was incredibly lonely. And in his final moments, as he lay dying, he didn't think of his wealth, power, or fame. He thought of only one thing: Sally West. Who was she, and why did she leave such a deep mark on Morgan's heart? Who was J.P. Morgan really? How did he earn his billions? And what secret did he hide his entire life? Let's explore it together. This is Beyond Ordinary Vision, where we dive into the lives of visionaries, leaders, billionaires, and inventors. Stories of people whose lives inspire and amaze us. So can you truly buy the world? J.P. Morgan's story says, maybe. J.P. Morgan's story begins in 1837 in Hartford, Connecticut. Born into a wealthy family, Morgan was not your typical rags-to-riches story. He wasn't a poor boy clawing his way to the top. No, Morgan was born into privilege, but his family had yet to reach the pinnacle of power. And J.P. Morgan, he would stop at nothing to get them there. The Morgan family's roots trace back to aristocratic Wales, far before they ever arrived in America. Morgan's great-great-grandfather, Miles Morgan, was born in 1616 and inherited the title of Baron. But in England, land and wealth had long been divided among the elite, making it hard for those of lower status to rise. So, at 20 years old, Miles took a risk. He boarded a ship bound for the New World, a ship called the Mary, and sailed across the Atlantic to start a new life in the British colonies of America. Miles quickly made a name for himself in Boston, becoming a successful farmer and even the head of his town. His descendants steadily climbed the social ladder, establishing businesses and earning their place among America's rising elite. Fast forward several generations, and we meet J.P. Morgan's grandfather, Joseph, who expanded the family's influence by controlling transportation and inns in Connecticut. But it was J.P.'s father, Junius Spencer Morgan, who made the leap that would define the family for centuries. He stepped into banking. Junius Morgan founded a banking house in New York City, expanding into insurance and other financial ventures. His disciplined, precise management style created a well-oiled machine, setting the stage for his son's future success. But life in the Morgan household was not all business. J.P.'s father was strict and emotionally distant, and his mother, Juliet Pierpont, came from an aristocratic lineage that traced back to the founders of Yale University. The pressures of living up to these towering expectations weighed heavily on young John Pierpont Morgan. However, Morgan's early years were far from easy. He was plagued by illness, crippling migraines, allergies, frequent colds, and a vascular skin condition that left his nose swollen and purple. This gave him an intimidating and often grotesque appearance, which only deepened his dislike for photographers. Perhaps this is why, even though we see his face everywhere today, J.P. Morgan himself hated being photographed. His childhood was marked by isolation. Unable to play with other children due to his health, young Morgan immersed himself in education, receiving top-tier tutoring at home. His father, already envisioning the future, took Morgan's education seriously. By the time he was a teenager, John was well versed in business concepts, and his father had begun preparing him to take over the family enterprise. But Morgan's health didn't improve, so his father sent him to the Azores, a small group of islands in the middle of the Atlantic where the climate was kinder. There, Morgan spent some of the most peaceful days of his life, walking along the shores, enjoying the sun, and overcoming his sense of isolation. It was a brief respite, but one that brought him some solace. When his health stabilized, Morgan continued his education in Europe. He studied in France and Germany, becoming fluent in multiple languages and acquiring a deep understanding of European markets. At 19, he returned to the United States and began working as a clerk in his father's banking house, learning the financial world from the ground up. It was during this time that Morgan experienced one of the most profound moments of his life. He fell deeply in love with Amelia Sturgis, a bright and charming young woman. They married quickly, and Morgan was on top of the world, ready to begin his life with the woman of his dreams. But there was one problem. Amelia was sick. She had tuberculosis, and despite Morgan's desperate attempts to save her, sending her to doctors, seeking cures, and taking her to resorts, nothing worked. Just 4 years after their marriage, Amelia died. The loss devastated Morgan. Grief-stricken, he buried himself in work, spending every waking moment focused on building his fortune. The heartbreak from Amelia's death hardened him, and from that moment, money and power became his sole refuge from his crushing loneliness. With a new sense of determination, J.P. Morgan established his first company in 1861, J. Pierpont Morgan and Company. He dove into the world of currency speculation, a lucrative but controversial practice. While not glamorous, it required patience, skill, and a sharp mind, qualities Morgan had in abundance. He grew the company, and over the next 2 decades, it evolved through several names, eventually becoming J.P. Morgan and Company, the banking giant we know today. As fate would have it, Morgan's rise coincided with one of the most tumultuous periods in American history, the Civil War. In 1861, the nation was divided, with the industrial North fighting the agricultural, slave-owning South. The war raged for 4 years, and both sides needed weapons. Morgan, ever the opportunist, saw an opportunity to profit. One of Morgan's most famous deals involved the sale of rifles. He purchased 5,000 old, discarded rifles at $3.50 apiece, refurbished them, and sold them to the Union Army for $22 each, a profit margin of over 600%. This deal netted Morgan $110,000, a fortune at the time, equivalent to around $2.2 million today. Despite the war raging, Morgan found a way to avoid military service, paying $300, about $6,000 today, to hire a substitute to fight in his place. After the war, Morgan's reputation as a shrewd businessman only grew. He became known as a man who could navigate the complexities of finance with unparalleled skill. His next big move? Railroads. In the late 19th century, the U.S. was undergoing a massive industrial boom, and railroads were at the heart of it. Unlike other countries, the U.S. didn't have a central company controlling all the railroads. Instead, dozens of individual entrepreneurs built small, disconnected rail lines that crisscrossed the country. But this chaotic system was rife with inefficiency and financial instability. Enter J.P. Morgan. Morgan didn't build railroads, he rebuilt the system. He saw the potential in uniting these individual companies under one cohesive network, so he began negotiating, persuading, and in some cases, strong-arming railroad owners to consolidate. He created a strategic plan that would turn America's fragmented railroads into a seamless national system. By the end of it, Morgan was the largest railroad magnate in the country, controlling a vast majority of the nation's railways. And with the railroads came other industries. Morgan quickly moved into steel and electricity, partnering with the likes of Thomas Edison, and later acquiring Andrew Carnegie's massive steel empire for $480 million, around $12.5 billion today. This created U.S. Steel, the first billion-dollar corporation in history. With great power came great responsibility and great scrutiny. By the turn of the 20th century, Morgan's influence was so vast that some believed he held more power than the U.S. government itself. When the Panic of 1907 hit, the American economy was on the verge of collapse. Banks were failing, the stock market was crashing, and the government didn't know what to do. That's when Morgan stepped in. He gathered the nation's top financiers in his Manhattan library and orchestrated a bailout that saved the country from financial ruin. It was Morgan, not the government, who stabilized the economy. His intervention was so successful that it led to the creation of the Federal Reserve in 1913, a system designed to prevent future financial panics. However, while Morgan had saved the nation, his influence sparked concern. Could one man have too much power? The answer was yes, but for Morgan, it was all in a day's work. Despite his public successes, Morgan's personal life remained marked by loneliness. As he aged, his wealth and power grew, but his heart still longed for something more. In his final days, he didn't think of his billions, his railroads, or even his role in shaping modern finance. Instead, as he lay dying in 1913, his mind drifted back to one simple memory: Sally West. Who was Sally West? She wasn't a business associate or a political figure. In fact, Sally West wasn't even a person. She was a canary, a small bird that had been Morgan's only companion during his childhood years in isolation on the Azores Islands. That bird, his first and perhaps only friend, represented a time when Morgan had found a sliver of happiness in an otherwise lonely life. J.P. Morgan's story is one of triumph, power, and unimaginable wealth, but it's also a story of solitude. He controlled industries, saved economies, and amassed one of the largest fortunes in history, but in the end, the one thing he couldn't buy was true companionship. And that brings us back to the question we started with. Can you really buy the world? J.P. Morgan's life shows that if you try hard enough, maybe you can. But even after building an empire that shaped the future of the United States and the world, Morgan still found himself alone, his thoughts lingering on the simple joy of a canary named Sally West. Thanks for watching. If you found J.P. Morgan's story as fascinating as we did, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe for more captivating stories about the people who shaped history. What part of J.P. Morgan's life surprised you the most? Let us know in the comments below. If you want to dive deeper into the world of finance, industry titans, or even more intriguing historical figures, make sure to turn on the notification bell so you won't miss our next video. And hey, share this video with someone who loves a good story about ambition, power, and the mysteries of history. Thanks again for watching, and we'll see you in the next one. Again for watching,